When a woman chooses silence, not as a punishment, but as protection, everything around her begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because she finally chose to stop explaining, performing, and pleasing, and return to herself. Have you noticed how the moment you stop chasing clarity from others, life begins offering it from within? How the silence you were once afraid of becomes the sanctuary you now crave. This is not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's alignment. We live in a world that teaches women to speak louder, to always respond, to justify every boundary. But true transformation begins the moment she realizes, my energy speaks before I do. My silence teaches louder than my words ever could. When a woman chooses silence, not out of fear, not out of resignation, but from deep strength, she begins to see the world with new eyes. In that silence, what was once confusing becomes clear. What was once noisy becomes irrelevant. The world doesn't always need your voice to understand your power. Sometimes it needs your stillness to feel your presence. In our modern lives, where speed is mistaken for progress and loudness is mistaken for authority, choosing to be silent is a radical act. Silence isn't the absence of something. It is the presence of everything that matters. It is not about withholding thoughts, but about refining them. It is not suppression. It is mastery. Silence is a skill, and for a woman, it can become her most powerful form of self-respect. You see, emotional reactivity has a cost. In relationships especially, reacting too quickly, too loudly, or too often places us in positions of vulnerability, not the soft kind that brings connection, but the frantic kind that empties our energy. Silence, instead, teaches you to hold your center. Neuroscience supports this idea. When the mind is quiet, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, decision making, and emotional regulation, activates more effectively. This allows you to respond, not react, to guide, not chase, to understand, not over-explain. There is a story of a woman who was constantly overwhelmed in her marriage. She loved deeply, but every small misunderstanding turned into a battle because she felt compelled to explain herself, to prove her intentions, to earn her place in the conversation. One day, after another exhausting argument, she sat in her room, eyes closed, and for the first time, she didn't think about what to say next. She didn't think about being heard. She just listened to her breath, to the stillness. The next time a conflict came, she didn't respond with words. She responded with presence. And in that silence, something shifted, not just in her partner, but in her. She was no longer trying to fix the atmosphere. She was the atmosphere. That's what silence does. It rearranges reality by removing emotional clutter. Psychologically, this is referred to as emotional self-containment. It doesn't mean you shut people out. It means you stop leaking energy, trying to control their perceptions. And here's the secret. When you no longer need to be understood by everyone, you begin to understand yourself on a far deeper level. Many women are raised to be emotionally available to others at all times. They're taught that their worth is tied to how well they can read the room, soothe others, or sacrifice their own peace to keep others comfortable. But silence rewrites that conditioning. It allows a woman to recalibrate her nervous system, to gather herself, and to distinguish between what deserves her energy and what doesn't. From an Eastern view, this is alignment with inner stillness. From a psychological view, it's emotional autonomy. From a human view, it's the beginning of real freedom. When a woman learns the art of being quiet, not silent out of fear, but silent out of wisdom, she becomes difficult to manipulate. You can't guilt-trip someone who no longer needs approval. You can't provoke someone who is grounded in their breath. You can't intimidate someone whose validation comes from within. In relationships, This kind of silence speaks louder than any lecture. A man who is used to a woman constantly reacting may feel discomfort at first when she doesn't respond, but over time he learns. He realizes that attention must now be earned, not demanded. Respect is not something she negotiates, it's something she embodies. That silence doesn't mean she is weak. It means she has shifted her focus from noise to truth. There is a subtle yet powerful transformation that happens when a woman turns her focus inward. When she begins to prioritize what she feels, not just what others expect. This is not selfishness, it's sovereignty, it's emotional hygiene. Just as the body needs rest, the heart needs quiet, a place where it can hear its own rhythm, not the chaos of the outside world. And this brings us to the second truth. When a woman focuses on herself, not in a superficial way, but in a sacred way, everything begins to realign. She starts to notice things she used to tolerate. She sees patterns she once justified. She recognizes cycles she no longer wishes to repeat. Why? Because self-focus creates clarity, and clarity is uncomfortable for those who benefit from your confusion. Focusing on yourself means you stop waiting for others to fill your cup. You take responsibility for your own fulfillment. This does not mean you isolate yourself. It means you begin with yourself. From breathwork to meditation, from journaling to body awareness, these practices aren't just wellness trends. They're tools to return you to your center. Psychology confirms that self-reflective practices increase emotional intelligence, improve boundaries, and reduce codependent tendencies. Let's talk about energy. When you're constantly focused on fixing others, being liked, or over-functioning in a relationship, your energy is scattered. And scattered energy is chaotic energy. People may be drawn to it, but it doesn't create peace. When you focus on yourself, your energy consolidates. You become more whole. And people feel that wholeness. They may not understand it consciously, but they are moved by it. There's a short tale of a woman in her late 40s who had spent years taking care of everyone. Her partner, her children, her aging parents. She barely slept. Her body was in pain. Her spirit felt hollow. One afternoon, she decided to sit quietly for 10 minutes and breathe. Just breathe. She did this every day for a week. Then she started journaling, walking alone, eating mindfully. Her relationships didn't improve overnight, but she did. And when she did, her family noticed. They didn't just see her, they respected her. Not because she demanded it, but because she started living from a place of integrity, not exhaustion. Focusing on yourself is an act of reclamation. It's how you teach the world that you are not just a supporting character in someone else's story. You are the author of your own. And when you treat yourself with reverence, others learn how to treat you as well. There's another layer here, one often missed. When a woman begins focusing inward, she uncovers parts of herself she abandoned to survive. The playful parts, the curious parts, the creative parts. She may remember passions she buried, dreams she shelved, desires she silenced. And in returning to these lost pieces, she doesn't just heal, she becomes magnetic. Relationships flourish when both people are whole. When a woman returns to herself, she no longer demands completion from another. She becomes her own source. And paradoxically, this wholeness is what makes true connection possible. Because now, it's not based on need, it's based on choice. There's a psychological concept known as differentiation of self. It refers to a person's ability to maintain their sense of identity while staying emotionally connected to others. Women who practice self-focus and silence develop high differentiation. They no longer collapse under pressure. They don't dissolve in others' emotions. They remain rooted, and that rootedness is calming. It invites safety. It makes her a lighthouse in someone else's storm, not because she saves them, but because she remains centered within herself. Think of a tree. The deeper its roots, the taller it stands. The more storms it can weather. When a woman focuses on her roots, her thoughts, her beliefs, her values, she stops being shaken by every wind of opinion. She becomes resilient. Her relationships are no longer built on fear of abandonment, but on shared growth and mutual respect. One might ask, what about love? Doesn't love require openness, sharing, connection? Yes, but love without boundaries is chaos. Love without self-awareness is dependency. When a woman focuses on herself, she purifies her love. She doesn't give from lack, but from overflow. And that kind of love nourishes both people. It doesn't deplete, it deepens. And silence is part of that, because not everything needs to be said. Not every reaction needs to be voiced. Sometimes, silence allows space for truth to reveal itself without interference. It's in silence that we hear our own heart. It's in silence that the soul speaks. And when a woman listens, truly listens, to that inner voice, she becomes unstoppable. There's a quiet revolution happening. Women are waking up. They're realizing that their power was never in how loudly they could speak, but in how deeply they could listen. First to themselves, then to life. They are no longer performing to be chosen. They are choosing themselves. And when they do, everything falls into place, not because the world changes, but because they finally stopped abandoning themselves. And in that return, there is peace. And in that peace, there is power. Emotional discipline is one of the quietest forms of power a woman can carry. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, and it does not seek attention. It simply is. It radiates from the inside out, and people feel it, even when they don't understand it. In relationships, emotional discipline doesn't just protect your peace, it preserves your dignity. It allows you to respond instead of react, to observe instead of absorb, and to walk away without burning bridges or yourself. When a woman is emotionally undisciplined, her world often becomes dictated by the shifting emotions of others. If someone loves her, she feels whole. If someone is distant, she becomes anxious. If someone criticizes her, she collapses inward. This roller coaster is not love, it's emotional entanglement. And the cost is high. Not only does she lose her balance, but she gives others the remote control to her emotional world. To reclaim that, she must learn the art of stillness under pressure. Stillness is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of wisdom. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't let your feelings drive your decisions. When someone speaks to you harshly, emotional discipline means you don't match their volume. When someone withdraws, you don't chase. You remain present with yourself first. The moment you begin to observe your emotional waves without becoming them, you become powerful. There's a story of a woman who had been in a relationship for years with a man who loved her deeply, but often tested her boundaries. He would get moody, withdraw affection, or use silence as punishment. In the past, she'd panic. She'd call, text, explain herself, even apologize for things she didn't do, just to restore the connection. But something changed. She began to meditate. She journaled. She read. And most importantly, she stopped chasing emotional resolution from someone who couldn't offer it. The next time he pulled away, she didn't chase. She stayed grounded. She made tea. She read a book. She smiled at herself in the mirror, knowing that her peace no longer depended on someone else's storm. That is emotional discipline. Not a performance, but a commitment to self-respect. From a psychological perspective, emotional discipline comes from increased activation of the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control. It is the biological ability to pause. From an inner growth perspective, it is the spiritual ability to rise. And in relationships, it is the silent shift that changes everything. When a woman refuses to be baited into unnecessary drama, she teaches others how to engage with her. She doesn't need to shout boundaries. They are felt in her energy. Some people will feel threatened by this. They are used to emotional access. They are used to watching her unravel to prove her love. But when she remains calm in the face of provocation, she disrupts that dynamic, and that disruption forces others to either elevate their behavior or exit her life. Either way, she wins, because she remained loyal to her inner calm. Emotional discipline is also about timing, knowing when to speak, when to be silent, and when to walk away. It's about being so in tune with yourself that you don't need to retaliate to protect your worth. Because you understand something deeper. Not every insult is a reflection of you. Not every conflict deserves your energy. Not every silence needs to be filled. In practical terms, emotional discipline shows up in the way you manage difficult conversations. It's choosing not to argue over text. It's pausing before responding to a passive-aggressive comment. It's recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate you through guilt or flattery and remaining anchored in your truth. It's being able to say, I understand how you feel, and this is what I need, instead of reacting with accusations or fear. It also shows up in the way you speak to yourself. Emotional discipline is not just about managing your behavior with others. It's about managing your internal dialogue. When something goes wrong, do you shame yourself or do you hold yourself with compassion? When you're rejected, do you spiral into unworthiness, or do you remind yourself that your value is not dependent on someone's acceptance? There's another woman, a quiet, thoughtful mother of two, who had always put her family first. She was loving, devoted, and deeply sensitive. But in her sensitivity, she lost herself. Every argument would leave her in tears. Every disagreement felt like personal failure. Until she began practicing mindfulness, not in grand ways, but in small, consistent moments, breathing deeply before speaking, asking herself, is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? Before long, her husband noticed the change. You're different, he said. You're calmer, and I feel calmer around you. What changed? She had stopped outsourcing her emotional stability. She stopped over-explaining. She stopped needing every moment to feel perfect. She became a woman who knew herself, and that changed everything. Stillness is not a luxury, it is a necessity, especially in relationships, because relationships are not always smooth. They bring out our shadows, our wounds, our desires. And without emotional discipline, these moments become battlegrounds. But with it, they become opportunities. Opportunities to respond with clarity, to model grace, to remain loving without losing yourself. This leads to something equally profound, the power of intuition. And intuition can only speak clearly when the noise is low. That noise includes emotional chaos, mental overthinking, and external pressure. When a woman cultivates stillness, she begins to hear what she once ignored, her inner knowing. Intuition is not magic. It's a deep form of pattern recognition. It draws on memory, experience, emotion, and subtle sensory input to inform you. Neuroscience has shown that the brain can process certain types of information faster than conscious awareness. This is why you sometimes just know something is wrong, even if everything looks fine on the surface. But the ability to access this inner knowing is blocked when the nervous system is overwhelmed or overstimulated. When a woman is constantly reacting, she disconnects from her intuition. But when she practices stillness, even 5 minutes of deep breathing, even a short walk without her phone, she begins to return to that wisdom. In those moments, decisions become clearer. She starts to feel when something is off. She senses the mismatch between words and energy. She notices how her body reacts to people before her mind forms a conclusion. That is intuition at work. There's a young woman who was in the early stages of dating someone. On paper, he was perfect. Kind, successful, attentive. But something inside her felt unsettled. Not fear, not trauma, just a quiet tug of discomfort. She ignored it for weeks, dismissing it as anxiety. But during a meditation retreat, in the stillness of silence, that feeling became louder. It wasn't judgment, it was truth. She realized that while he was kind, he was also subtly controlling, not through violence, but through expectations. She ended the relationship, gently but firmly. A year later, she learned he had a pattern of emotional manipulation with his past partners. Her intuition had spoken, and because she had listened, she was spared. Stillness allows access to this sacred guidance system, but it requires practice. It requires you to slow down, to stop filling every space with activity or noise. It requires you to trust yourself more than you trust appearances. And this trust is built in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when you are alone with your breath, when you place your hand over your heart and ask, what do I know that I've been avoiding? Intuition doesn't shout. It whispers. And to hear it, you must become quieter than the world around you. You must learn to trust that not every red flag comes with a loud warning. Some come with a subtle tension in your chest, a sense of disconnection, a lack of peace, and your ability to honor that without needing proof is what makes you powerful. In relationships, this means you stop needing someone else to validate your feelings. If you feel something is off, that's enough. You don't need to investigate, prove, or justify. You simply listen and you act. This protects you from prolonged confusion. It saves you from losing yourself in relationships that look right but feel wrong. But intuition doesn't only warn, it also guides. It tells you when something is safe, even if it doesn't fit your checklist. It draws you toward opportunities that others may not understand. It urges you to speak when your fear tells you to stay silent, or to stay silent when your pride tells you to speak. There was once an older woman, widowed, living a quiet life by the sea. She had no plans of dating again. But one day, during her daily walk, she met a man, also widowed, also solitary. They spoke briefly. Something in her stirred. It wasn't excitement, it was peace. Her mind doubted. You're too old for this. What will people say? But her body said otherwise. Calm, soft, safe. They met again and again. Slowly, gently, love returned. Not the dramatic kind, but the steady, rooted kind. When asked how she knew it was right, she smiled and said, I didn't think it. I felt it. And this time, I trusted that. This is what stillness does. It reconnects you to what is real. It softens the noise of the world so you can hear the truth within. And when a woman commits to this path, not as a performance, but as a practice, she becomes unshakable. Not because life is easy, but because she is deeply aligned. She does not rush. She does not chase. She listens. She breathes. She moves when it's time and not a moment before. And in doing so, she lives with clarity, compassion, and quiet confidence. When a woman chooses to focus on herself, something fundamental begins to shift, not only within her, but in every relationship she touches. It is a subtle recalibration, a return to her own rhythm. The people around her feel the change before she even says a word. The dynamics that once drained her no longer hold the same weight. The situations that once pulled her in now pass by like waves against a rock. She no longer feels the need to resist. This shift is not loud and it is not vengeful. It's not about cutting people off with coldness or creating walls out of bitterness. It's about withdrawing from the emotional functioning that was never hers to carry. Psychology calls this withdrawal of over-functioning a crucial step in reclaiming agency. When a woman stops managing others' reactions, emotions, and expectations, she gives people the opportunity to take responsibility for their own growth or to step away. In relationships, especially those that have grown imbalanced over time, this shift often feels like a confrontation, even when no words are spoken. A woman no longer explaining herself, no longer begging to be heard, no longer overextending her nurturing nature. This disrupts old patterns. It is not punishment. It is self-respect. It is not detachment. It is returning to what was neglected herself. There's a quiet transformation that happens when a woman realizes she no longer needs to be the emotional caretaker in her relationships. She stops being the mediator, the fixer, the one who absorbs everyone's pain just to keep the peace. She begins to let people be who they are, even if that means watching them fall, even if that means sitting in discomfort. Not because she is indifferent, but because she finally understands that enabling dysfunction is not love, that rescuing someone from the consequences of their own behavior is not kindness. It's self-abandonment. In one particular story, a woman named Alina had spent years trying to hold things together with her partner. He was charming, but often irresponsible, reactive, and emotionally inconsistent. Every time he made a mess, financially, emotionally, socially, she cleaned it up. She coached him through difficult conversations. She defended him to friends and family. She even blamed herself for his outbursts. But one day, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was clarity. She stopped reminding him of appointments. She stopped smoothing over his mistakes. She started saying things like, "I trust you to handle that," or "You're capable of solving this." At first, he became more reactive, more desperate to pull her back into her old role. But she held her center. She focused on her career, her health, her joy. Eventually, he either had to grow or go. And when he chose not to grow, she didn't chase. She didn't explain. She simply continued walking toward herself. That is the power of withdrawal from emotional overfunctioning. When a woman stops feeding systems that depend on her depletion, she changes the entire equation. Relationships that are rooted in imbalance cannot survive when one person returns to balance. And relationships that are rooted in love will adjust, deepen, and evolve. This is not selfishness. It is emotional sobriety. It is refusing to confuse drama with passion. It is no longer mistaking chaos for chemistry. And most importantly, it is realizing that your worth is not measured by how much you can endure from others, but by how well you can nourish what is sacred within yourself. People will notice the change. Some will feel threatened. They will accuse her of being distant, cold, or unfeeling. But those are the cries of those who were never required to meet her in her wholeness before. They were used to fragments, to pieces of her. Now, they are meeting the full version. And the full version does not negotiate with disrespect. A relationship built on mutual growth welcomes this shift. It may be uncomfortable, yes, but it is also an invitation for both people to rise, to take ownership of their inner world, and to meet each other from a place of strength, not survival. This process creates emotional spaciousness, and within that space, the truth of the connection reveals itself. Is there reciprocity? Is there curiosity about each other's growth? Or was the connection sustained only by one person overcompensating, while the other stayed stagnant? Focusing on yourself is not an act of rejection. It is an act of refinement. It's how you create an environment that welcomes truth, presence, and depth. It filters out those who are only interested in the version of you that bled for them. It invites in those who want to stand beside you, not on top of you. This shift in focus naturally leads to a deeper truth, the understanding that your inner awareness directly shapes your outer reality. This is not a mystical idea. It is grounded in both science and lived experience. The way you feel about yourself, the way you carry your energy, the beliefs you hold in your mind, these all form the lens through which others perceive you. Neuroscience explains that the brain uses mirror neurons to interpret and reflect the emotional states of those around us. When a woman enters a room with calm, grounded energy, the people in that space are biologically affected by it. Their own nervous systems begin to regulate in response to hers. This is not charisma, it is coherence. It is what happens when your inner state aligns with clarity, peace, and presence. From an Eastern perspective, this is the power of intention and vibrational alignment. Your energy speaks before your words do. And when your energy is rooted in self-awareness and emotional sovereignty, it naturally attracts respect. You no longer have to demand it. You embody it. There's a soft, spoken woman named Nadira who worked in a high-pressure corporate environment. She wasn't loud. She wasn't assertive in the conventional sense. But people listened when she spoke. They respected her presence. She was never the one dominating meetings, yet when decisions were made, her input carried weight. Her secret, she had cultivated a deep relationship with herself. She knew her values. She didn't react out of insecurity. She didn't seek approval. She showed up every day from a place of grounded alignment. Her awareness of her own energy influenced how others treated her. When a woman develops inner awareness, she starts noticing the subtle shifts in her environment. She recognizes when someone's tone doesn't match their words. She feels the hidden motives behind gestures. She becomes attuned not just to what is said, but to what is felt. This awareness protects her. It helps her discern who is safe and who is performative. It helps her navigate connections without getting entangled in illusions. This inner awareness also teaches her how to respond to life's challenges. Instead of spiraling into anxiety, she becomes curious. Instead of collapsing into guilt, she pauses and asks, "What is this situation trying to teach me about myself?" She doesn't blame or deflect. She reflects, and this reflection refines her. It softens her edges without weakening her boundaries. Your outer reality is a reflection of what you believe you deserve. If you believe love must be earned through suffering, you will keep attracting people who make you suffer. If you believe peace is a luxury for others, but not for you, your life will mirror that belief in endless chaos. But when you begin to know, deeply know, that your worth is non-negotiable, your standards rise, not as rules, but as reflections of your inner clarity. People treat you the way you treat yourself, not in words, but in energy. If you constantly self-sacrifice, over-explain, and tolerate disrespect, you communicate to the world that you expect nothing more. But when you sit in silence with yourself, when you heal what once made you accept crumbs, when you begin to show up with softness and strength, the world adjusts. Those who cannot meet you will fall away. Those who are meant to walk with you will rise. Relationships built on inner awareness are more intimate, more transparent, and more resilient. They don't require performance. They invite presence. They're not built on proving worth. They are sustained by mutual reverence. There is a woman who once believed that her value came from being everything to everyone. She said yes to every request. She smiled through exhaustion. She loved people who didn't know how to love her back. Until one day, she sat quietly in her room, hands on her lap, eyes closed, and she asked herself, what would happen if I stopped? What would happen if she stopped rescuing, explaining, and proving? What happened was not immediate peace, but clarity. She began to see who actually cared for her, and who only cared about what she could do for them. She grieved. She let go. And in the space left behind, something new arrived, a softness in her own breath, a joy in her own company, A relationship that felt like a gentle partnership, not a battlefield. Her outer life began to reflect the dignity she had reclaimed internally. Inner awareness is not perfection, it is attention. It is asking, moment by moment, is this aligned with my truth? It is giving yourself permission to pause, to feel, to say no, to walk away, to return. It is knowing that your body is wise, your intuition is sacred, and your peace is a non-negotiable standard. You do not have to explain this shift to others. Your life will show it. Your presence will speak it. Your energy will carry it. And when you walk through the world from this place, not guarded, but guided, you become a mirror. You reflect truth, not fear. You hold space, not resentment. And you attract not what flatters your wounds, but what honors your healing. And so, as a woman begins to walk the quiet path inward, choosing stillness over reaction, focus over chaos, awareness over impulse, her world begins to change in ways she once believed required force. But now she understands she doesn't need to fight to be seen, chase to be loved, or explain herself to be valued. Her silence becomes a sanctuary, her solitude a source of power, and her presence a quiet revolution. This is not the kind of power that seeks to control. It is the kind that cannot be controlled. It flows from emotional maturity, not manipulation. It rises from self-respect, not resentment. And it expands from the simple yet sacred truth that when a woman honors herself first, everything else in her life either aligns with that truth or falls away. She no longer waits for permission to become who she already is. She no longer performs for connection. She simply stands rooted, listens deeply, speaks only when her words carry intention, and moves only in the direction of peace. Her life becomes her message. Her energy becomes her boundary. And her love, no longer scattered or strained, becomes whole because it is first given to herself. This is how everything falls into place. Not through striving, not through struggle, but through the profound act of returning, fully and unapologetically, to the woman she was always meant to be.